just like us. Don't you remember? You were born to be free, just like us. Don't you remember? Don't you remember?
Beautiful. That is a beautiful song there. And it's great to be here tonight. I'm coming to you live from upstate New York, from the town or the small city of Elmira. And it's midnight Eastern Standard Time. And my name is Julian Raven, and this is Raven's World. And I'm glad to be broadcasting live once again. It's a great tool the internet is that gives us the platform to be able to speak, and with so much to say in this world today, with so many things going on, our hearts, many times mine especially, is always bursting with wanting to express myself and wanting to share my views on the world. And many times, some people can verbalize what a lot of people are excuse me, thinking, and also bring direction and information that brings understanding to help people sort of dissolve the questions in their mind and the things that are making them concerned and frightened many times, or, just simple questions about life, the purpose of life, and the meaning of life, those things, the existential questions. I love it. I myself am someone that is a truth seeker, and I'm consistently looking and learning and delighting myself in this journey of life as we walk through this world, obviously, onto a better place waiting for us in the kingdom of God. So welcome to those who have joined me tonight. This is my second broadcast since I restarted after having a pause for some years, and it's early days, so I'm still sort of working out the kinks in the system and trying to optimize the little equipment that I have. But it's great to be able to use the home-based computer system and a webcam camera to be able to actually chat with people. This is an interactive program. I had a couple of people send me requests earlier on Skype. You can Skype me. I didn't connect the camera Skype yet, where you'll actually be able to call in, and I'll split the screen and we can have a split screen conversation. That'll be for the next few weeks. But you can Skype me at ravens.world. That is my Skype name, ravens.world. And if you send me a Skype request, I can answer that, and I can have an audio conversation with you on the broadcast. And also you can call in to a US number, which is, if you're calling from outside the US, it's 1-607-873-2101. That's 873-2101. So without further ado, it's time to dive into tonight's subject, and obviously the Syrian refugee crisis and Islam. Both topics that are very important in the light of, obviously, the recent terrorist attacks in Paris and in Mali just yesterday, and other things that are going on throughout the world. But we obviously just get news of those major things that come across the airwaves, and they're tragic, they're critical, they are serious, of very the very serious nature that causes us as people to look at them closely and say, what does this mean? What does this mean for me? What does this mean for where I live? What does this mean for the world? These are critical and serious times we live in. So my response, obviously, as a Christian, is to bring a Christ-centered response and to try to see the issues through the eyes of Jesus Christ. And to do that, I look at it through his words and through the teachings of Jesus, and it gives me great understanding and comfort also, because I don't get bent out of shape. Years ago, before I was a Christian, you'd process all these things and they were very weighty, but through faith in Christ and through his words, it gives great comfort and understanding. And it's what is really interesting is that when you see this issue, like, for example, the Syrian refugee issue, which the media, with the interconnectivity of the world today, with the rapid constant flow of information on our desktop computers or on your iPhones or on your television, it's amazing. We're flooded with such a massive information, and when bad news comes, it comes like a tidal wave. And the Syrian refugee crisis has been building for the last however many years, 3-4 years since the Syrian refugee civil war took place. And now we're faced with this massive humanitarian crisis. And the question becomes for Christians, for us in the West, is what is the appropriate response if thousands of refugees suddenly start, washing up on your shores? They're traveling westward from Syria. And what is the correct response? Should nations in the West just sort of open their borders and let everyone just come in? We've got on the one side the huge economic strain that may put on a nation, or we've got now the problem of terrorism, because Syria is the hotbed of ISIS, which is the latest manifestation of radical Islam to threaten the West, to threaten Western nations, to threaten the United States. And so out of Syria is coming not just hostility in Syria against each other in the civil war, but you've got ISIS, this massive terrorist movement that is wanting to threaten the rest of the world, and no longer just threaten. Now they're carrying out attacks, as we just saw in Paris. So, how do we respond? How do you feel you should respond? And I believe a lot of people, I've put comments up of late on my Facebook page, and I try to be honest with myself and with the way the world is, and express that in a way that's respectable but honest. And it always brings the same reactions. Some people throw their arms up in the air. They're so easily offended. This and that, and people just they respond so emotionally rather than, let's say, thinking clearly with their heads. They respond because it seems cruel or unkind or divisive, or you can't say that. We live in this multicultural world and we all have to be nice to each other and touchy-feely, and sort of ignore some of the glaring truths and facts and the glaring obvious realities that are taking place, that are painting a very broad picture for us to then be able to stand back and say, yeah, but look at this picture. We can't just pretend that everything is okay. We can't just pretend that we're all going to get on and have a nice time and that everything's going to be happy and we're all just going to just love each other and have a wonderful party. I mean, it's just wishful thinking. It's naive, or naivete, should I say, in the worst, degree, because it's shocking how deep in the sand some people's heads are buried. And so obviously, the point is that what is the appropriate response? Are we to be manipulated by the media, the guilt-laden, you're not doing enough, or Christians should just open their borders and open their homes and everyone has to, that's what Jesus would do, and you're not doing it because you're not Christian enough and you're not, all this stuff. And then people feel bad and they're afraid to say, well, I don't actually believe I need to do. Oh, you're not a Christian now and you're a mean-spirited, and all this stuff goes on, and this manipulation, this emotional manipulation of people's ideas, rather than say, hey, well, you know what, maybe you've got a valid point. But at the end of the day, the answers are found for me always in the Word of God and in the words of Jesus, or in the words, obviously, of the Scripture and the entire body of Scripture. So I wanted to share the thoughts that I specifically have found that I think specifically answer brilliantly the issue of the refugee crisis from a Christian point of view. What would Jesus do? And then obviously after I share with that, I'll touch a little bit more on Islam and the realities of Islam and the threats that Islam as a religion plays in this whole scenario that is unfolding before our very eyes. So I'm going to share a passage from the Bible. I'm going to read it. It's not a huge amount of verses, but it's enough. It's a short passage, and it's a story that most people know very well. And most people will misapply it or misquote it or use it as a justification that everyone should open their borders and we need to be compassionate to the point of this, that. And it's like, okay, well, let's see. Here's a great teaching from the words of Jesus. So it's actually from the book of Luke, and we're in chapter 10. And I'm going to read from 25 onwards. I'm just going to focus on these words a little bit here. And then as I do that, I'll give my interpretation, what I think it means, and what you you might think it means. I'm reading here from the New American Standard Bible. It says, "And behold," this is verse 25, "a certain lawyer stood up and put him," Jesus, "to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said to him, What is it written? Or what is written in the law? How does it read to you? And he answered and said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him," that is Jesus, "You have said correctly, you've answered correctly. Do this and you will live." And, just from that point onwards, that's the issue there of loving our neighbor. It's like, how are we to love our neighbor? What does this mean in relation to the Syrian refugee crisis? But wishing to justify himself, he said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" So Jesus replied to him and said, "A certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, and they stripped him and beat him, and went off, leaving him for dead," or leaving him half dead. "And by chance a certain priest was going down on that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite also, when he came to the place and saw him, he too passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan who was on a journey came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion, and came to him and bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them, and he put him on his own beast, brought him to an inn to take care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I return I will repay you." And Jesus says, "Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands?" The Good Samaritan, that's such a great parable of how we are to love our neighbor. But when we examine this teaching, it sheds amazing light on the issue with the Syrians today. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to give it my own little personal interpretation here. When Jesus says, "And a certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho," Jesus places this man in the middle of 2 cities, in the middle of nowhere. So he would be totally foreign to a lot of people who might see him or meet him because he was not at home. It wasn't in his home. It wasn't in his hometown. It wasn't in his neighborhood. It doesn't tell us where he was from. It just says that he was between Jerusalem and Jericho, and that's quite a distance. So could be on a road somewhere in the middle of nowhere. But he's between Jerusalem and Jericho, and he fell among robbers, and they stripped him and beat him and went off, leaving him for dead. So here we see a man that's, not located in his home, and he's being beaten and robbed, and a terrible thing has happened to him. And what I want to do is try to place this passage in a way, or replace it in a sense that fits into the Syrian story, because here we have Jesus, who is Jewish, speaking to Jewish people about a story relating to Jewish people in Israel. And in order to sort of contextualize it, we need to sort of move it over to Syria. Let's imagine that Jesus was a religious teacher in Syria, or as himself talking to Syrians, and he's talking about a certain man walking down, between Aleppo and whichever other city, and he's talking about a Syrian man, and the Syrian man falls under the abusive hand of these robbers. Now we could say, well, the Syrian people now are represented by this person, that the Syrian people now are the abused people who are abused by Bashar al-Assad, the dictator who is the ruler of Syria. Let's say that the robbers was the oppressive regime of the dictator, and the people of Syria represented by the person that was being beat up and robbed there. So here we have the Syrian people, that they've been abused, they've been beat up and robbed. And what happens then is that by chance a certain priest was going down the road, and he saw him, and he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite also, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. Now, translating this into Syria, the priest and the Levite were Jewish religious leaders at the time, so we would need to translate them into the religion of the land of Syria, which is Islam, and we would translate those guys into an imam and some other religious leader, a Muslim or Islamic leader, and they are we could view as the rest of the world, the Islamic Muslim world, looking on and seeing the people of Syria being beaten down by Bashar Assad, and they see the conflict, they see the terrible suffering of the Syrian people, the beaten, bloody man lying down in the middle of nowhere, and they look at him and they lift their heads up and they walk by and pretend that they don't see it. And so that's a great way to contextualize this story. So it goes on though, but it says a certain Samaritan who was on a journey came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion. So we are seeing compassion come not from the Islamic world. If you look at a map of Syria, and if you're not familiar with it, I have one right here. I can't pull it up on the screen, but just to give you a little background, it's interesting to pick it up. Syria is surrounded to the north by Turkey, which is a Muslim country. And it's not a poor country. Turkey is a pretty advanced, if not one of the most advanced Islamic countries. To the east, it's Iraq. It's still in shambles from the war, but there it is. It has its wealth in oil. To the east of Iraq is Iran. And these are massive nations. And then to the south then of Syria, across the border of Iraq or Jordan, which is another Islamic country, you have Saudi Arabia. And, Mecca is sort of directly south from Syria, which is like the capital of the Islamic world, and Yemen. And then to the southeast, you have Egypt and Libya. So Syria is surrounded by Islamic countries and Islamic, religious organizations, and, all of these different nations. And it's funny how it's they always leave it up to the West, and the West feels an obligation to have to take care of the Syrian problem, and the West happens to be Christians. Now, what's interesting is that in Muslim countries, all those countries, Algeria, Morocco, Libya, Egypt, and you go further east, and you got Saudi Arabia and Yemen and Iraq and Iran and Turkey, and those are all the countries where Christianity is a minority, a persecuted minority, and Christians are looked on like a Samaritan, so the Good Samaritan, you see in Israeli times, Jews viewed the Samaritan like with disdain. They were like the minority and they were despised. And so now we see a similar group of people would be the Christians, that are the minority and would be the despised people by the Muslim world, the Islamic world, and they're the ones now who are responding with compassion like the Samaritan did towards the Islamic refugee crisis that these people, these Syrian people who are Islamic, are suffering. And the Samaritans technically were worshipping, they had their own religion. It was similar to obviously what Jews had, but they had their own faith. And so it's very similar in that sense. So imagine now, so the Christian West wants to be compassionate towards the terrible suffering of the Syrian people. And now then you have, clearly all the surrounding Islamic nations representing the priest and the Levite, who are the religious leaders. I wouldn't say they're doing nothing, because I don't know, they may be doing something, but in general, I think they're doing zilch. Because why are they not opening their borders, to Iraq or Saudi Arabia, and welcoming in hundreds of thousands of these people? And it's their brothers, it's their religious, brothers and their religious comrades, we could say. They don't seem to be doing it. The Syrians are fleeing west, directly west, across the Mediterranean towards Greece, going into Greece and then walking up through Greece, and they're heading towards Germany, northwest towards Germany and Europe and France and those countries there. So it's funny, you've got now Islamic people flooding westward, heading towards Christian nations. And so we ask the question then, so Christians are showing compassion, which they are. We see the suffering and our hearts go out to these people. And we want to see good come to these people. And we say, well, so what should we do? Does that mean that we now open our homes and open our borders and our nations to another people group with another faith system? They come from nations that are hostile towards our faith, actually, that all of those nations are hostile towards Christians. Do we welcome them in? What happened in the story? So we go back to the story now and try to remember this. And where you see here, and the Samaritan man, and we'll imagine these are the Christians, they see the suffering of the Syrian people, they feel compassion. And they come to him, and they bandaged up his wounds, and pouring oil and wine on them, he put him on his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. So here we see Christians reaching out, wanting to help the Syrian people, wanting to help this broken, beat up man, bandaging his wounds and putting him on a vehicle to take him to a better place of safety. And where does he take him? Don't forget, this man is in the middle of two cities, in the middle of nowhere. The Samaritan man doesn't know where he's from. There's no neighbors around, immediate neighbors. He's a distant neighbor. And what does he do? He doesn't put him on his donkey and take him home. He doesn't go and take him anywhere, to what would be viewed as his own place. He takes him immediately to the closest place that relates to him, because he was in Israel, and he takes him obviously to a Israeli or Jewish hostel or hotel, where he then pays for his lodging. Because look what it says. It says, and on the next day, he brought him into an inn, and he took care of him there. And on the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I return, I will repay you. Amazing. The Samaritan takes out money, and he pays the Jewish innkeeper to take care of the Jewish man. And he then says, anything else that needs to be done for this man, I want you to take care of him. Because again, he was between Jerusalem and Jericho, and so he's in Israel, and it doesn't say that the innkeeper was Jewish, but we can assume that he was. And so here we see the foreigner, the Christian, the Samaritan, taking care of the Jewish problem. And how does he take care of him? He doesn't take him back to his own place. He takes care of him in his own environment in Israel, and he just gives money kindly and graciously, bandages his wounds, and he pays the innkeeper then, here's more money. And if you spend more money taking care of him, when I come back, I'm going to pay you some more. So he literally completely takes care of the bill to take care of this man. So I think, this is Jesus' teaching on compassion, on how to take care of a people group that's not your own, how to take care of a people group that are your neighbors, but they're your distant neighbors. They're not your immediate neighbors. This isn't your neighbor down the street. My next door neighbor broke his hip, and he's, and we take him into our home. That's a whole different. We know him. We know his family. We know it's different. This is where we see Jesus saying, hey, you know what? It's okay to have a system like the hotel inn, which is a neutral ground, where you can actually pay and give and take care of this person who you don't know, and that person will be safe and cared for, and that you can pay the whole trip, the whole stay, and make sure that person is totally taken care of. That is amazing, and it's compassionate, and it is the model that Jesus gives us. So Christians can rejoice and say, wow, what I personally believe, let's establish safe zones in these countries. In Syria, if the neighbors won't do anything, first of all, you try to get the neighbors to the Syria, the Iraqis or the Jordanians or the Turks, to say, listen, you got to take care of these people. If they don't, and the Christians have got to do it, the Christian nations, United States or Germany or England or Spain or these Christian nations, then let's establish some safe zones in Syria. Let's fund them. Let the government give. Let the people give. Let them give to charities and, World Vision and the Red Cross and all these different great charities that are out there that can do great things to help these people. Let them give to them. And then when they've given and the people are back on their feet because they've funded them, then Syrian people will be better and be back they can rebuild their own country and their own lives. Nothing wrong with that. It's righteous. There we go. Jesus is not compassionate now. Jesus is cruel. Jesus saying to the Samaritan or to you need to take him back and put him in your... He's not saying that. He says, take him, and the guy is the illustration is he puts him in this hotel or in an inn, and he pays for him to be taken. I think it's brilliant. I think it answers all of our questions. And it also points a finger very clearly at the religion of Islam and the religious leaders who should be taking care of their own. They should be taking care of the Syrian refugees. Look at, Syria is north of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is such a wealthy nation with the oil that it has. They could be pouring millions back into Syria, taking care of them, rebuilding, helping with rebuilding, all that, whatever. They wouldn't even have to take them into, or they could all join together. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iraq, Turkey, Iran, they could all join together and deal with the civil war in Syria and deal with it's up to them. It's their people. It's their people. It's not the responsibility of the Christian West to take care of that. Now, obviously, because it destabilizes the region, and it can cause, the problems politically, and can cause problems where you can have, like we have now with ISIS. Then the West, in order to defend itself, wants to get involved and wants to quell the terrorists, and wants to obviously help the Syrian people regain their dignity and to rebuild their land. That's a good thing. It's a righteous thing. And so the West wants to and should be involved as much as necessary to help them do that. So, it's a pretty simple lesson, in my opinion. It's a pretty simple example. And I think that it gives Christians great freedom to not be all bent out of shape and feeling all guilty and, oh, we need to take it. It's like, no, it's ridiculous. The Christian world is, the Western, especially Western Europe is opening itself up to, to be overrun by a people group that is not theirs, that a people group whose vision and whose, ultimate, confession of their faith is they're not content just to live in their nice little quiet peaceful communities and worship their God in their own way. Obviously there are some moderate Muslims that they don't know anymore, and they're happy to do that, and they're decent people. We know that's the case. But at the heart of Islam, at the heart of the teaching of the clerics and the imams and all this, the majority of these guys, they all have this vision. They all have a vision of Islamic supremacism in the world. They all have a vision of world domination. They have a creed that supports, jihad. The jihad is the goal of righteous Muslims, and jihad ultimately has its expression in war and in conquest and in, taking over the world for their cause. And we don't need to invite that into our backyard. We let them stay where they are. And if they do want to come, I think it would be great. Well, you've got to become Christian. You've got to, come into a system where you show yourself that you renounce your faith, you embrace ours in Christian nations, and you come over. The multicultural, ideas are just totally lunatic for me. They are self-destructive, because it doesn't work. As much as we want to think that people are going to be nice, if we're nice, it just doesn't work. You may have small minority groups, but if you start welcoming in massive numbers, they will grow, and they will grow in courage and boldness, and they'll see what they want, and they'll want to take it. And that's what's going to happen, and is already happening in different places. We can see it in France. We can see today the news with the panic in Belgium. They say in Belgium they have, neighborhoods that are totally Muslim, where police don't even go in, that they're totally shut out of it, basically, because it's so tight-knit. They've lost control, basically, of those districts, in the sense that they don't even police them anymore. That's the type of place where problems will grow, and that's where they believe that the plan or the plot for France and the attack on Paris took place. So that's happening right in your own backyard. It's ridiculous. And America and the United Kingdom and Western Christian nations need to realize this. And then we go back to this issue and the problem of Islam, because when you think about Islam, and when you think about the history of Islam, we have 1,400 years of history written down, very clearly, stated what Islam has done over the last 1,400 years. And, when you look at the positives of it, Islam, there was a golden age of Islam, and there was great architecture, and there were great discoveries, great medicine. And, there obviously there were a lot of positive things that came out of the Islamic world. But in the general, in what history showed us, is that Islam, when it's acting as in its true nature, is a conquering faith that wants to go by the sword and conquer by the sword. And it did for hundreds of years. The Crusade Wars that Christians rose up to fight against the advancement of Islam, that went on for over 400 years. 400, we're dealing with a problem that's been growing in the last 15, 20 years, or, in our lifetime, in one sense. The Christian wars against Islam for 400 plus years, and it's a long time. Long wars against an aggressive and militant jihadist mindset, which is at the root core of Islam. And if you deny it, you've never read those things in the Quran. If you deny it, you've never read history. It's like I had a discussion with someone today, and it's like trying to play fetch with a Bengal tiger. It's like he's trying to appease this monster that the more you do it, the more it's going to devour you when it's ready. And that's what has happened with, obviously Islam, I think, and the rise of Islam and the rise of militant Islam now expressing itself through Al-Qaeda, expressing itself now through ISIS, and they're not going away. Each advance that they have, and when they have such a a commitment to their ideals and their vision, that dying for them is the goal. Dying for them is glory. How do you fight an army of thousands, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 jihadi soldiers who are all committed to dying willfully and happily for that? It's a very, very, very difficult war to fight because of the level of commitment. And all they're doing is gaining in their ranks, because when they accomplish a strike on Paris like they did, it gets them great credibility amongst the people that they're trying to recruit all over the world. They're trying to recruit from Africa. I mean, you look at the nations they're recruiting from Algeria, from Libya, from Egypt. They're looking at Mali, Niger, Chad, the Sudan, all these nations, all these Muslim nations. ISIS is recruiting from all over Africa and the Middle East and these places, and it's not stopping. The flood or the influx of fighters is going. So what is it going to take? It's going to take, some type of severe military response that has to decimate and kill the ideology in the preachers of the ideology to such a place where it can't continue to replicate, where it starts getting decimated and it can't be echoed. The echo chambers in people's hearts, and that it starts to, and then maybe it will dissolve, and they will, they'll deal it the death blow, cut the head off the snake, basically, and that will put an end to the radical Islamic terrorism group, which is called ISIS. But as we've seen, out of Al-Qaeda and the death of one comes another one, and so, it'll just probably keep sprouting, and there has to be a persistent, pressure put on them that it's not going to happen, and obviously pressure put on Eastern Islamic nations that they themselves should be the ones dealing with this problem, not the United States all the time, not the West always dealing, it's like, let those nations deal with it, and they don't, and there's silence, and you're like, what is this all about? So, those are my thoughts there on being compassionate, as Jesus taught, being a good Samaritan. I think it's great how that illustration gives us great liberty in our hearts, and not be all, feeling, oh my goodness, we've got to take the world into our back. And it's like, it's okay. Let's take care of them over there in Syria. Let's build safe zones for them. Let's go and, let people, you feel like you need to send money to World Vision, or send money to an organization that's legitimate and that's helping the Syrian people. That's a legitimate way to help them, take care of them, and bless them and pray for them. And if they want to come westward towards our countries, you become a Christian. And live a Christian life for a few years in Syria. We'll set up Christian, places where Christians are protected, and when you're a Christian, you want to move west and emigrate the right way. I'm sure there's a pathway that could be set up. But if not, stay in your own country. I think that's perfectly legitimate, and the boundaries that God establishes in nations, let them stay in their own nation. We don't have to have them come our way, because they will bring, obviously, the threat of seeds of ISIS with them, who will smuggle themselves in amongst them and cause us harm. That's why they're coming, these folks in my they want to cause us harm. So those are my thoughts there on those two subjects a little bit. Obviously, there's a lot more to say, and getting back to broadcasting for me is a fun thing, and also obviously, it's a serious matter, and it gets things off your chest. You get to share with people, and obviously record it and then broadcast it later on. And that's pretty much where I am today. I'm just checking my Skype here. These folks are, one of these guys is in Pakistan. He is a Christian living in Islamic Pakistan. And I interviewed him one time before, and he's an eloquent guy who lives right in the midst of the Islamic world, which is Pakistan, which is a very hardcore Islamic nation, and as a Christian knows firsthand how they suffer, how they're treated like third-class citizens or less just because of their faith. And it's always great to get a perspective like that from amongst people who are really experiencing the hostility. And that will be coming up, and other folks I will be interviewing once again in different parts of the world. That's the genius of the internet and of Skype. And doing video interviews is fascinating to get a really good grasp on the way other people on the ground are actually experiencing life in these countries, especially in Islamic countries, because that's an important lesson for us. We can't be this touchy-feely land of multicultural ideas thinking that everybody's just going to get on and live together in peace. It's just, it's wishful thinking. It'd be nice if it was the case, but it's not. So that being said, unless my phone were to ring right now, And once again, it's 607 if you're in the United States, or calling from abroad is 1-607-873-2101. You can call in. If it rings, I'm going to take that, and if not, I am going to then put a song back on and drink some water. This is, again, Randy Stonehill's album. I was playing it before, and it's a beautiful song, Angel's Wings.
Sweet rolling river, till the cool flowing water.
So I'm just going to take a break, take a glass of water, enjoy this song.
Washed me clean. And when I rise in the sunlight, I will gaze ever homeward, for there'll be no need to look back again. And angel's wings were fluttering over my shoulders, and they lifted me up above all this darkness and dust. And my heart was on fire when I heard the song they were singing. They sang, "Don't you remember, you were born to be free just like us." And I dreamed of a meadow filled with beautiful flowers and silvery white horses. I was watching them run, and all of my loved ones who had gone home before me, they were there by my side. We were there, everyone. Oh yeah. And angels' wings were fluttering over my shoulders, and they lifted me up above all this darkness and dust. And my heart was on fire when I heard the song they were singing. They sang, "Don't you remember, you were born to be free just like us." Now the devil was waiting, standing there at the crossroads, and he smiled like he knew me, and I hung my head down. Then a white dove descended, shining bright as the morning, and though Satan was shouting, he could not make a sound. Yeah.
So it brings me there to a close on Raven's World Saturday night. It's about 20 to 1 in the
I
morning.
have struggled so long
Thank you for joining me.
on this strange pilgrim journey, and the wild wind has cut me
It's a great
as
song.
the sun